Okay, hopefully it's a lot shorter, especially since Max spent hours and hours and hours thinking about all this, and then Max finally wrote it down, and then Max spent most of his time talking about almost all the points, so it's faster. Okay, so it's going to be writing, hopefully nothing else. Okay. We'll probably also talking about it in a reading video, hopefully we make that. But we're probably going to save it for the weekend, and then we might also live our ambition. Whatever's keeping us energized and moving and actually being able to do things today, we'll probably lose that, but right now, our spark of inspiration is to do all, because once it disappears, we're done for, and it'll probably never happen. Or it'll take all of eternity for us to get to, you know? As you put off to last minute. Okay. No, but writing. Okay. I can't spell for the most part, and then Max also got better and can spell a lot more and say things, you know. Instead of saying things and forgetting words, I can usually remember them, and I'm a lot better at spelling and texting than speaking. Okay, how Max learned words and everything. Yeah, okay, so Max has a lot more vocab. Yeah. And just because of force of habit and all the correcting from the teachers, because, like, spelling, we're going to focus on spelling right now. Okay, spelling doesn't make any sense. And then also, you learn more and more that you're like, and you're also like, oh, my logic might not be real logic. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then you have to let go of logic and be like, no, it doesn't make sense, but it's not supposed to, you know? That's what you have to do most of the time. You're like, no, let it go. And then, and the perfection video would be like, yeah, because I was like, oh, you're not really a perfectionist, but then Max is like, coloring, yes. Other things, no. Almost nothing else except for when we color, and we don't notice and don't realize. Coloring, yes, because Max will spend hours and days coloring things. And then Max will be like, I can't color anymore because I might fuck it up. And then that's usually when we forget about it, and then we hyper-focus again. And then we do the same thing with writing. And we might have done that with drawing and everything, and painting and stuff like that, but we also were like, we don't have talent, and then we had to, like, really learn we had no talent, and we're like, even if I had an MG and could spend years and years learning how to do this, yes, I might improve, but I might not even get close to the drawing I saw, and I compared to myself, and how I realized, oh, you don't have talent in this area. And then Max is also like, you can't prove it, because Max now only draws monsters. And you're like, oh, but there are laws and definitions for monsters, so you're like, it has to fit in this category, you know? And Max is like, no, it must be different. It can't follow your laws and rules. And you're like, oh, but it's wrong if it doesn't. And then you're like, you can't prove that. And if it's, like, bad, and even, like, a really, really bad drawing, and we, like, messed up really badly, and there's just nothing we can do about it, we should erase it. But you're like, maybe not. You know, maybe we can edit this, and we probably just make it worse. And then you're like, but you drew a monster, so is this on purpose? Is this intentional? Is it just an ugly creature? I can't tell. You don't know. And you can't prove it. You can't prove I'm wrong. That's the most important thing. Max is terrified of being judged. And then Max remembered and forgot about, okay, hopefully we can just talk about Peacemaker once and be done with it. Because I realize now, and I'm like, oh yeah, I am a little bit of a people pleaser. Especially when I was young, and then we were just like, no, we can't make even people happy, even when we do try, and we try and fit in. We still mess up, and it usually doesn't work out, and they still end up hating us. And we still end up bullied, so it doesn't work, you know? So just give up on your dream. Because I was a peacemaker for the most part, because a lot of friends would fight, and then Max might lie and be like, I agree with both sides. And then, in general, Max usually didn't know anything about the topics. And then even if Max did, Max was like, I don't really agree with either of you, and I have my own opinion. And because I just want to be different, or it might be true. And then also, because, like, I agree with a little bit both things, and I just want to put them both together. I like both things, put them together. And also, to me, they're the same thing. And I might, like, pick and choose what I like from both subjects. And I only see the similarities, and I think they're the same thing. So that's how Max was always involved in arguments and everything. And Max was like, stop fighting! Stop the screaming, you know? Because we had that at home. We didn't want that at school, you know? So that's probably why we were, like, people pleaser. And Max would do anything to get out of the conversation. That's how Max got scammed out of $5,000 money, you know? Yeah. Max lost all of his earnings from his first job, because Max could only, like, keep it for, like, a couple months. Mostly because Max would quit, because Max was like, I thought you were going to fire me, and you didn't, and then I waited, and you still didn't fire me, So I put my 2 weeks in, and Max was also like, oh, I'll get surgery right away, or I need time off just to be able to dedicate my time and, like, see and talk to the doctor and be like, hey, can I get surgery? I still probably have to do that again, but hopefully not quit. Maybe this weekend we can finally call and talk to doctors about everything Max has been saying. Max is also on repeat for that, because Max is like, hopefully remember, hopefully write it down, hopefully we actually do it, and not just say we can on a bench. Hopefully this ambitious and this talking. Hopefully communication continues to happen and we can talk to people. Okay, yeah. But yeah, that's all for people pleaser. But Max earned pretty early on, and then Max just wasn't good at it. For the most of the time, Max just wasn't good at it, and then most of it was just lying and everything. Just don't want to interact with people. And then Max, like, really learned in 6th grade, because Max made the most effort and was the most ambitious with talking to people, that even if you lie and you try, mostly, you do what you think they want. It turns out you don't know what they want. And even if they do end up happy, it's not worth it and doesn't make you happy. It just doesn't work. Because they might notice that, and they might be real friends. So, like, oh, no, I want your real opinion. And then you're also older and everything, so they only notice, they'll be like, you're lying, or like, our opinions don't match, or like, they're like, you're copying me. You're like, you can't actually agree with everything I say. That's just not accurate. It just doesn't make sense. Because otherwise you're me. That's probably why I was mirroring too. With the mirroring thing, you're just copying people, and you don't notice. And you're mostly doing it because you're a peacemaker. You're like, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Like, you're right about everything, but you're like, oh, we can't be matching because we're not the same person. And, like, I noticed, and I saw the difference, and I know we're different people. And you said something before, so you're probably lying. You know, they're older, and you're older, so you notice, and you're like, it just doesn't work. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to try and just be true to me. And maybe make that work, and maybe just try and make us happy. Because making everyone else happy never worked, and it's not going to work, and just keep causing us more pain, and also makes it easier, and make it so they bully us and hurt us. Yeah. So we're like, oh, a little bit slowly learning about boundaries, and like, oh, maybe I make a wall here. Maybe make boundary, or like, oh, this is not a good thing. And I was starting to realize that, and it's starting to finally sink in a little bit of all the repeating of my friends being like, this is not normal. And I'm being like, oh yeah, it really is not. Like, oh. And you're like, oh, I just now realized, and that's why all my friends were like disappointed and be like, really? Just now? They would be shocked and surprised, and I would be like, oh, you learned this too? They would be like, no. The fact that you learned it now because I've been telling you your entire life, and like, we all thought you just knew. And you just never found the right words, and we thought you probably just forgot the words, you know? Because you had all those symptoms, and you were describing what was wrong all the time. And you were showing all the symptoms all the time, so we knew what was wrong, but you didn't. But we thought you knew, and we probably told you multiple times, but you just now got it. Yeah, okay. No, but writing, yeah. Well, then they're like, okay, so back to writing and not perfect people pleasing. And then Max was also like, I'm different, and like, I want to be different, so I might like pick an argument just to be different, and just so we talk or something on purpose, just to keep things interesting and not be bored. Yeah. Max was like, oh, you do that now. Apparently you should realize all this sooner. Yes, getting cramped from setting. Yeah. Okay, writing. Okay, we were talking about spelling. Okay, so spelling, we can't do that, and vocabulary, we can't really do that, and we didn't learn that. And then, like, I'm sorry, but even if you know perfectly and everything, you're not going to spell perfectly, or get vocab perfectly every time. And then Max is no hope. You know, and then also, they did the confusing, they told me the laws and how it worked, and then Max maybe absorbed some of it, and then you told me that, oh, in this case, and oh, maybe just with this one word, it's different. So Max like, oh, it's actually a lie, and like, this is a hypocrite, because you said this is a rule, and then you broke all of them. But you're like, oh, it was just this one case, you know? But Max doesn't know about that one case. And Max probably wasn't able to learn the rules, and Max now knows that all the rules are broken, so why would we learn rules if they don't make sense anyway? Yeah, it just doesn't make sense in general, in normal logic, in your people logic, so it doesn't make any sense to me. Sometimes that works in reverse, but it didn't work with spelling. I know how much you teach me, and for years and years you grind it into my head. We just can't get it. That's what happened with addition and multiplication. But once you moved on to subtraction, but you're like, oh, you're sometimes wrong because they're connected. And then Max also had to teach himself, because once we learned about the opposite thing, we can do the opposite, but we can't do the other thing. We also have to teach ourselves. I used subtraction to learn how to do addition, so we could do subtraction. Max used division, so I learned how to do multiplication and can multiply a little bit. You're like, I'm not good at multiplication, I'm not good, and I'm the worst at addition. You're like, some hope, multiplication. And then that some hope and a little bit better than some hope with subtraction. Subtraction is a little bit better than multiplication. But multiplication is way better, and a lot of times, and sometimes better than subtraction. And then division is superior to all, and it's the only thing Max understood. Max is like, I can divide, I can make things small quickly. I love this. Oh, why can't we do this? And it's not just by subtracting two big numbers. Max is like, I see a little number. A lot of little numbers. Max can handle numbers that are tiny. They're big, no. And then Max can't count. It's a different video, though. And then reading. Yeah, Max got it, like, the first time, but also had to teach himself how to read. And then also, Max, like, skipped right to the big books, because Max, like, I can handle... And Max, like, it's too easy. And then Max also tricked everyone, because Max didn't have any talent and wasn't super smart or, like, advanced reading, like, siblings. Especially the one... They all had my siblings before, and they were, like, 4 years before you. So, with my brother, or maybe, like, 3 years, because he was held back, but that turned before, because Max was also held back a year. So, we're, like... Yeah, so they're like 5 or 4 years ago, oh, you're related to Daniel. Okay, he struggled with, like, everything, and you don't quite struggle with everything. And then you're like, oh, you're 2 years difference than your older sibling. And he was, like, 3 or something, because of... Then they were held back, too. And they were forced to be held back, because otherwise they would have caught up to Daniel, and they would have been in the same year. So, yeah. And then Max is also held back at just learning his ABCs and counting. So that's mostly why addition sucks, because we're like, we can't count, what is this addition thing? And then also, Max was very confused, because with counting, a lot of times you start at 0, and you're like, if you add 1, Max also learned with the weird, like, where they do that little hop thing, where they do that circle, that little bump, you do a bump, they draw a bump to connect the two numbers. And they're like, to do that one, if we count how many bumps we make, we'll know what number we're on. You know that trick? But then that doesn't always apply, and that doesn't always work out. Mostly Max like, oh, like, we're at 0, so we go to 1, that's 1 bump, and then 1, and then we're at 1 now, so we count to 2. Okay, that's 2 bumps, so we're at 2. But then that doesn't work out when you're like, but then you're at 2, now you count to 3. But then if you add those bumps, that's 3 bumps. And that's just counting to 3. And you may or may not have, and then you might have an extra bump or something, because you messed up counting, or because you're counting 0. Because you know, and you should be like, 2, 1 plus 2, because it just turns out like with 2, or usually like 2 plus 3, or down that line, Max can add or whatever, because normally you're like, oh, 1 plus 2 equals 3, but for that, there is usually that extra bump because of 1, and Max counted that, so now we're on 4. And you couldn't teach Max differently, and Max was stuck on it, Max believed it for the longest time, and then was like, and then after being forced and be told wrong 24/7, and then being forced to write it all the time, then we're like, oh, it's just 3. It's not 4, it's 3. Yeah, so Max can add. And Max remembers this because Max was a real struggle, and Max is one of the reasons why we failed kindergarten and had to retake it, okay? And I don't think they even taught addition, and they probably threatened to hold me back in 1st grade, because Max couldn't add. Because Max would write for most of the numbers, except for the bigger ones. Yeah. So you had to, like, teach me in all different ways, and then Max had to teach himself, and then just to be repeating what you said and just copying and pasting. And then the copying and pasting most of the time didn't click, so Max still doesn't know how to do any of these things. And then even when Max maybe did click, Max has forgotten now. Okay, yeah. No, but writing, okay, we can't spell and vocab, whatever. Okay, but for spelling, like, we can do beautiful, because it looks, if the word looks like, and we can visualize when we see it, its meaning. Like the word special, you're like, that's written with different words, different letters, that it's different than what it sounds like. And the word different has 2 F's, when you usually normally see 1 F. And then even then, sometimes you get that wrong. Like, in my head, the word people has 3 P's instead of 2. But you're like, there are multiple P's, which you envision, you're like, there's more than one person. And that's what the meaning of the word is. And then, with the word purple, you visualize with the color, and you're also like, there are 2 P's. So it's a bright color. It's important. So Max knew actions, so names were no hope, except occasionally when the name was like hope or joy or something, and then Max was like, I can't associate with that name, because I just learned that was an emotion. And I still can't connect that for like newer ones. But Max can connect a little bit, and in certain cases, because Max's sibling named Joy. So Max got used to it in some cases. But Max just usually had to get used to it after a while, so it finally connected. But Max is mostly adult now, and Max is like, we just need to find a nickname and something that does work, and we can associate with a name, and not be, because if I see your name, I won't think it's a name, I'll think of the definition. That's what happened with the name Freedom. And so we're going to have to pick the middle name that we just learned, the nickname we got permission. We found a different name. Because they're like, oh, you can shorten it to like nickname Free and Dome. And I was like, that's a different meaning, and that does not help the problem. Because Max still can't get your name and Max also learned about BDSM, so the word dome means completely different, a different thing. And then Max also realized that problem when I was like, oh, and I'm like, it's the same thing if I put F and dome, but it stands for freedom in this case, but you're like, oh wait, crap, I learned that and memorized that as female dome, so that means something else, so that still doesn't work. So it's a good thing that we learned about like a middle name. And then we're also going to be stuck on that because the conversation we had recently about Hunger Games. Because the only way Max remembers and memorized the name was because apparently it's Pita. It's not Peter. But to me, it will always be Peter because it's the only way we learned it, and we remember the books, and we read it forever ago, and we just can't change it because it's the only way we understand it. And you'll confuse me with the word Pita. I don't know who you're talking about now, but when Max says Peter and explains to himself that's Pita is actually Peter, you're like, oh. But their name is similar to that. Their middle name is like Pita or something like that, or PT. I don't know. No, PT means something else. That's toilet paper. Nope. Okay, so it's like Pita. And Max just learned about and was like, oh, their name was Pita and not Peter. And they also explained it to me. They're like, Pita, like short for Peter. Or it's close to Peter. That's how I picked it. Okay, yeah. No, but Max has to reinforce that because Max's like, I have to memorize and remember to call them that name, and I'll probably have to reread that message forever. Yeah. Because there'll be conversations and everything, and Max also was like, is this just a nickname? Is this not a real name? Like, I don't know, because we haven't talked in like a year, because we can't see each other, because we barely saw each other when we lived in the same house, but, like, occasionally Max will crawl out of his room on a day off and be awake during the daytime in the same time as you, so we'll interact. And then, when we do interact, it's probably just noises, because we struggle with words. And even when you don't struggle with words, you're amazing and you're perfect. But sometimes you'll end up with like a stutter or something. And Max is like, oh wait, I have a stutter too. And if we both act it together, then there's no hope of communication. So we actually have to default to noises. So then, worse happen. So we have full conversations and like essays communicated solely through looks and hair gestures and noises. It's beautiful. So happy about that. Oh. Cute song that had the word different in it. But yeah. So I learned the words like different, special, or beautiful, or pretty, if it's used like to describe something, or mostly if it's an action and a color. Action, color, or an object I can see, and most of the time it's like a monster, or like a made-up creature, then Max will like really knows how to spell that, or at least will be close. Close enough to be able to type into Google and it'll be like, oh, this is what you're saying. And most of the time we can visualize it, and then sometimes we'll have to relearn it, like the word mustache. You're like, oh, and you imagine like a funny picture, and you're like, oh, then you remember, oh, it's spelled a little bit funny than compared to how it's spelled, or how it sounds. The main thing how it can spell at all is like, oh, you sound it out. But for some reason that doesn't work for a lot of things. And it's mostly just because we saw it a lot and we wrote it a lot, so we're like, oh, I know how to work the word cat and dog. And then we learned that randomly there were E at the end, so we just added to everything, and then had the teacher correct it to learn, oh, it doesn't go here. We're like, oh, we don't have to add an E on the word cat and dog. And then it has the word Y at the end, or it kind of rhymes, or it sounds like it rhymes. Then I can usually, or Max uses it a lot, then I can usually, spell it. Okay, so Max can do like fly, try, cry, die, but that's one spelled different, and then die, depressed, and mental terms and LGBT terms that I'm interested, and new things I'm learning I can usually grasp onto and be like, oh, I get this. And that's how Max was dumb and stupid, and like, I was like smart and like a genius level, but also like super stupid, and like just couldn't get it in school. Because Max would like pass the flaming characters and get A+ in everything, and that's why Max was almost always like A's and B's, and then B's like a little bit of C's, and usually just barely passing in some things. So it was like depending on what you're teaching and how well we get it. Because like one year, 5th grade, we learned about division, and Max was really good at division, and Max was a little bit better at addition and multiplication at the time. Mostly because we had to double check and be like, I really get division. And so Max got the highest score in I-STEP in math, and Max was like almost could have been in the advanced class for math. But then they moved on to a different topic, or we learned something else in math, like shapes or something, and Max was like, nope, don't get it, barely passed. And just failing at all the tests, and it's mostly just copying and pasting. And then also, Max is, you're like, oh, usually you're like more than one type of learner. But you at least like have one. I have to at least have 2, most of the time 3, and then more than that. And then even then, maybe I can't learn. So I have to have visual and hearing. I can't have one or the other. Or I can have hearing and hands-on. Most of the time I have to have hearing, doing, physical touch, all my senses involved. See it, hear it, and touch it. And I'm doing it. That's why Max was always taking notes in class, because otherwise, no chance of learning anything. Yeah, because when you're like, oh, you can't feel it, or you can't, like, sense it, you don't have that third sense in a movie, Max becomes so absorbed, and the only thing that exists is the movie or the story, so it's real, and Max does feel those things. So Max will feel it, and Max will be able to touch it. And Max is not just seeing it and reading it, Max also is now also hearing it, because my imagination is so active and everything. Yeah, so now writing, yeah, okay, so we also tricked ourselves with stories and everything, and we only wrote about fantasy stuff. It's the only thing that piqued us interest, and then we also obsessed about the details, though. And then we can't always, we have to stop and go back to it and stuff, because then we're like, I forgot a word, but I can usually find a smaller word, and we're like, or I know the really big word, and I remember it, but I can't spell it. And I probably can't also pronounce it, and most of the words I can't pronounce, or I'll forget if I'm saying it, but I know it when I'm writing down, and if I see the word, I know the definition, but maybe I just never heard it, and just didn't connect audio. It's a visual, and imagination involved, yeah. But that's how Max learned. And then Max needed, like, the 4th sense of, like, smell, or, like, another feeling, or another, like, sensation, or something else being involved, or, like, eating and tasting. And then if Max is, like, really hyper-focused, well, like, I learned that term recently, we're just going to abuse it. Okay, now, but if Max is, like, really involved and, like, completely detached, and that thing is real, Max will have all 5 senses. because it's now his reality. So Max will taste, and that's where my imagination is a genius, because Max will now taste, see, feel, touch, do, and like even with emotions and everything, Max will have all of it involved, because the event is happening to us. It is real and is our new reality, and we are the main character. And most of the time we can't step away from that, and Max usually had to leave the room. Because Max is like, oh my god, I'm about to die. And it would be like, oh my god, you're not gonna really die. Or like, I can run away. You're like, or you're yelling at the screen, you're like, run away, run away. And then you do run away. Because you're like, I'm in the person, I'm the main character, so I can just run. And you do. And then you have to like show up at the end. Because you're like, I couldn't do the action part, because right at the climax, I died, and I saw my death. And to avoid my death, I ran away. Like the main character should have. Except I also ran away from the screen, so I don't know the ending. And then Max can't watch it all the way through. Even later, when we know the ending, we still can't watch that part. Because we got so invested in it, you know. Okay, yeah. No, but, yeah, so those missing parts usually fill in, and Max will feel and taste and see and hear. Even if it's just like a visual and you only have one sense. And Max can imagine and fill in those gaps. Then Max can hopefully learn something. Otherwise our imagination will get distracted, or our other senses will make us distracted. Because Max actually hears something, and maybe we can ignore it if all the other senses are involved. Otherwise we have to get distracted and we forget everything, we don't learn anything. We're like, oh, we have to look now. Or Max hears things that aren't there, and don't happen, and there aren't noises for it. And Max has to look, because Max is hearing things. And then Max is like, I can have Max can also have all senses involved, and things that don't exist, and that aren't apparently real, and aren't really there. And that's, most of the time we don't, and we finally convince ourselves, and we also believe that things that are real aren't real, because if we don't, we get stuck, and we're like, oh my god, I'm being attacked. Because, and like, so everything in reality is like, I can't tell the dream versus reality, or my imagination, or what I'm seeing from reality, but I'm gonna like continue to work, and I'm gonna get ready for my job, just in case, because that fear and that guilt is keeping us moving, and that just in case usually turns out to be right and be reality. So Max actually can't tell the difference, but that fear keeps us going, and that just in case this is real, we'll do something. And just in case this is real, we'll wake up and go to work. Just in case this is real. Yeah. And then we're like, usually if it's painful and it's bad, then we're like, yeah, this is real. And we're like, we couldn't make this bad, even our imagination, you know? In rare occasions it surpasses our imagination, reality does. Like, in rare cases, in the story, there'll be a twist that we didn't see, but we usually read it because what we want happens, so we're as a happy surprise, even if it's a bad event. And Max is almost always predicting something negative and believes something bad will happen. Or Max like thinks what's going to happen, and it's like I either have to see it actually happen and say it, or they'll actually surprise me with something that's different and maybe positive and not negative. Yeah. So, and then for spoilers and everything, it'll be either Max recognizes a pattern and will say it, or most of the time anymore, it'll be the people are actually trying to surprise the audience. So what Max wants to happen, or Max is like right for once, you know, what Max wants to happen, or Max what thinks is going to happen, probably because it's the exact opposite is going to happen, because you have to make it more interesting, and you have to make more twists and everything, especially with my generation and the new generations and everything, because to keep us watching and to keep us invested, and so we actually finish the movie and we keep our attention, because we don't really have it. So there has to be more action, there has to be more events, it has to be more dramatic, so we watch it and we finish the movie, and we have something to remember and talk about, you know, all of that. Okay, yeah, okay, that was a different movie about spoilers. No, but writing, okay, so I get away with it, and what I do is, because Max will be, like, too lazy for most things to be like, and I don't, if it's not something I'm interested in, then we won't learn about facts about anything, and then Max just learns, like, the rules for things. Like, you're like, oh, it has to be like a vampire, And then there's also, like, that's why people were mad and more strict. If you were stricter and, like, super vampire fans, you'd be like, hey, you don't twinkle, you, like, burn in the sun. You're like, you can't change that, even if it's fiction. Because you said he was a vampire. The Max is a lot more forgiving, and the Max is also just interested in the love triangle, and the Max is also only interested in the triangle because Max is like, two boys get together. And you're like, this girl thing, that's a cover-up, that's a lie. This is her imagination. Skip that, ignore that, forget that. There are two boys, and they're fighting, and that's hot. They're fighting over a girl, and they claim to love this girl. I don't believe it, but they're fighting, and they're together, and they're hot. Max just wanted to see more hot men. And then Max also was like, learning his type, and then Max was also seeing more options, and you're like, oh, this is actually what's hot. You just didn't see other options before, and you didn't know your type or what you were into, so you thought it was hot. Okay, Max is probably wasting hours talking about different things. Okay, no, but, so that's why I'm also, like, I don't pick, like, oh, just a vampire. And Max keeps making up his own things, and, like, oh, not just a hybrid. And then you're like, a hybrid of anything, especially with drawings and everything. I'm like, oh, not just a vampire anymore. And then Max also can't draw a lot of things, so we just fill in the gaps, because Max, like, really obsessed over it with hands, but there wasn't that much improvement, and even when we really, really tried, still wasn't as good as my friends and everything who had talent, and who then made effort and really, really tried. Theirs was better and better, you know, because they had talent. So, hands are not flaws, because it's faster and we can finally finish this drawing. Teeth, we probably were going to forget about those either, but now it's going to be interesting, and it can't just be a werewolf or something, so... And then maybe, okay. So, and then more things, the better. Okay, tails, check. Ears, check. Horns, check. Wings, check. Claws, check. Tails, check. And then maybe more than one tail, you know. And then maybe like a dog face. Like, maybe I'm just drawing an animal and I messed up. So it's now human. Or humanish. Or this weird half thing. Something that breaks the rules, or then we actually were like, oh, we messed up, we're going to make it different, so you can't tell that we messed up, or that it doesn't follow any of the rules. We must break all the rules. It can't fit into a category. It must be an all. That's why you're like, oh, because the more you try to break out of it, the more rules they put on things, just to make it have a definition, and to make it easier to understand. Like, for hybrids, they're like, oh, if you're part of this and this, you turn out this way or this way, you're like, more options will turn out, but still... in these limits. So Max is like more and more hybrids and more parts go into you. So now you're a fox, you're a cat, you're a dragon, you're a demon, you're a vampire, you're all of these things now. So you don't fit in any category and you can do whatever you want because Max will mess up. Anyway, and then Max will just accept it and move on because otherwise we'll obsess over it and then we'll just erase it all and start over. And then we'll still never be happy with it, you know? And it's the same thing with writing, because I visualize it, and if I visualize it with all the details of the scales and the fur and everything, and then they're like, different parts maybe have scales, and maybe they both have fur and scales, you know, I don't know. The more imagination, and for writing, especially if you're writing a story, only your imagination is the limit. And Max's imagination is getting more and more wild, and the more information we take in, we're like, we just add it. We add it to the pile, and we're like, yep, and now we can make imagination even better. So it solely relies on your imagination. You're like, yep, I can do this for just writing a story. And then Max broke laws, all laws, if there were any limits and restrictions on imagination and definitions of things. So you couldn't tell Max now when he accidentally messed up before. So Max learned to add things. But then Max obsesses over the details and the fine print. So Max will probably never finish, but Max was able to do that. But we have to publish, so you can see it, and then we might also just come back and edit it later. Otherwise, it'll stay a draft forever, because we'll never finish editing. And then also have to be the possibility, and it has to be a document or on the writing site, so we can go back and edit it, so we can move on, so we can actually focus on something else, because we'll realize later, or want to add something later, and it probably won't, but just having that option of, oh, you can change this, oh, you can add this, makes it so we don't focus as much, and we're like, okay, I can let it go, I can be done, I can move on to the next thing. Yeah. Okay, so that's the writing. We'll talk about it more in writing and perfectionism. We're mostly covering it in multiple videos. You know, we're talking about a lot of things just over and over again. So hopefully it gets out of our system, and Right now we can't talk to people, so we're talking to you. And we also have to do multiple things. We have to talk to you, message everybody, and talk to somebody in person. And then probably talk about it again after we forgot for a little bit. But we have to forget for a little bit just for now. Okay, that's everything for writing and all I can remember. But yeah, if it's an action, animal, especially if it's a magical creature, if it's different, if it's special, I can spell it and I know what it is and I'll remember it. If it's a color, it's color, action, emotion, creature or animal, or it just looks really different, or the word's really close and looks like the definition, like the word parallel. There are two L's together, so you're like, oh, that's what it means, and that's the definition. Unless I remember how to spell it. Because the rest of the word sounds the same. It sounds how you write it, except for the extra L. And little tricks like that, you know. Okay. And like different, you're like, it's different, so two F's are together. Because you don't hear two F's when you say it. Yeah, okay. That's everything for writing and spelling and that jazz. I'll probably cover this again in other videos. Bye.